Good afternoon, everyone. So today we'll be going over these ones here. So it starts off with finding and using sources. We're going to start with some math, which I know a lot of people hate. You're not actually doing math, it's just understanding math. And if you've taken Math 144 statistics, hopefully you've covered some of this before. But in terms of using math and using data to support your research, it's really important you understand how the data you see is actually being generated to make sure that it is good, credible data. So we're going to go over some basic stuff here. And then we're going to hit the rest of it on the in-text citations and the end-of-text citations, or the works cited entries, as I refer to them. And then I'm going to show you how to use this website, MyBib, which will be your best friend. If you haven't used this yet, it's wonderful. It makes everyone's lives so much easier. It's really nice, right? So all of these can be found in Module 3, and this is finding and using sources. So for these ones, because most of these are pretty concise themselves, I didn't make a PowerPoint for this one because they're pretty brief and right to the point. But we're going to go through each one of these today. And if you struggle with any of this, especially after class, let me know. All right. We're going to kind of show some basics about statistics, how to do a little bit of statistical analysis to make sure that the information you have is really good information. All right. So kind of skipping through this kind of stuff. But reading through statistics, all right, the first one is obviously important. Does your evidence come from reliable sources? And this goes back to what we talked about last time about source credibility. If you're using a peer-reviewed scholarly article, you can generally just trust the evidence they use in there because it's been peer-reviewed. It's gone through this very strict process. The numbers, the data that's in there is going to be reliable, right? This is really more when you're reading something on the internet. If you find a web screen or something like that, it's pretty important that they know what you're talking about, right? So here you want to make sure that it's good there, right? And this sounds weird, but what is the data's background, right? So it says data and stats don't just fall from heaven fully formed. They're always the product of research, right? Therefore, to understand the statistics, you should also know where they come from. For example, if the stats come from a survey or a poll, some questions might include who asked the questions in the survey or the poll. So who's the person actually giving this poll? Who asked it? What were the questions? This is really important. If you word a question in just the right way, you can get a completely incorrect response because you chose very tricky language to use. And people do this all the time. So if you can identify what the questions they were being asked was, it's really important. And then who interpreted the data, right? So somebody asked the questions, somebody formulated the questions, and then someone else collected the data based on those questions. And then someone else probably interpreted the data, right? Being able to form a survey is a skill set. Being able to interpret the data from a survey is a different skill set. So very often it's different people or different groups of people, right? What issue prompted the survey or the poll, right? Why do they feel the need to take this survey? If it's something innocuous like, oh, we're filming an episode of Family Feud, so we have to interview 100 people about, their favorite type of food. That's very innocuous. It doesn't really matter. There wasn't a major issue that prompted them to make that poll, right? But if someone's trying to gather information from a survey or from a poll about how people in a certain community feel about a law that's being passed, for example, the issue is important, right? Because without the issue, they might not have ever asked that, right? So even thinking about that, so I used this before because it's close and relevant. So legalizing recreational marijuana for sale in Watertown, right? Or any other town in this area, right? Lots of polls were conducted immediately after it was legalized in the state of New York, right? So the issue that prompted that was the legalization of recreational marijuana. That was the issue, right? How you choose to approach a survey then can kind of change that. So you look at what policy or procedure potentially hinges on the results of the poll, right? So let's say we polled 100 people in Watertown and we found that 70 out of 100 wanted to legally sell recreational marijuana in Watertown. That's 70%. That's the majority of the poll sample size, right? And so that could influence city lawmakers to approve or disapprove of the sale of it, right? And then who stands to gain from particular interpretations of the data, right? For almost any kind of poll or survey or data collection, someone's going to be the winner and someone's going to be the loser based on what can be done with that information, right? Almost always. So using that same example, Let's say the person who asked the questions that created this survey and interpreted the data was somebody who already owns a chain of marijuana dispensaries in other states that have already legalized it, right? They're probably going to ask questions in a way to elicit a positive response about sale of recreational marijuana, right? Versus someone that might come from a prison industry background who might have seen a lot of harm and dangers of drug use or something like that. They can word their questions differently to get a different kind of response. So even if they interviewed the same 100 people, they could get two vastly different responses from these groups of people based on how the survey was conducted, what the survey said, how the data was interpreted. Excuse me. So many different variables. So it's really important that you understand these so you don't get fooled into believing things that may or may not be true. Because we see data and numbers all the times and it convinces us, right? So think about these types of things in terms of, is this credible information? If they tell you or it's available, if this information is available, it's more than likely a good poll, more than likely, right? If you really, really search to find this information and you cannot find it, it is not accessible to you, that's probably not a good poll, because any genuine, credible poll would be more than happy to share all of this information with you, as well as the results of the poll itself, right? So just think about that anytime you see these types of things. Then you think about the data. Is all of it being reported? Or are they leaving out bits and pieces that don't support their agenda? That can also make a really big difference. No matter what the issue is, this is a big concern, right? Let's say in this same thing, same example, we're talking about recreational marijuana in Watertown. And they leave out the fact that they only interviewed people that were leaving a rehabilitation home, people that have a history of drug use and drug abuse, right? If they don't tell you that, that is a very skewed poll, right? Because these are people that have struggled with drugs for a large portion of their life. They're probably going to be against the sale of recreational drugs in their town, right? Versus someone else who, if they interviewed 100 people and it was at a gathering of nothing but people that smoke weed every single day, it's going to be a very positive response, right? But if you don't know that that's the group of people they interviewed, then they're leaving out a major piece of the data, right? So make sure all the data that you have is good data, that it's full data, that it's all there, right? And then has it been interpreted correctly, right? This is kind of tough. We're going to talk more about this in a second, but confusing correlation with causation, okay? Causation is A happened and it made B happen, or A happened and it affected B, right? It's a clear one-to-one connection, right? If I hold up my coffee mug and then I let it go, coffee's going to get spilled all over my desk, right? Causation was I let go of my coffee mug. That caused the coffee to be spilled all over my desk. Direct causation, right? Correlation is different. Correlation means these two things seem to happen in pairs. These two things seem to happen at the same time. These two things seem to be related. They're correlated, right? So let's say you're failing a class and you say, well, I haven't been sleeping well all semester long. There's probably a correlation between you not getting any sleep and you doing poorly in class, right? But without further analysis, without doing some more digging, we can't prove that your lack of sleep is the cause of getting bad grades, right? Maybe the cause is you're not getting sleep because you party every single night. Well, it's not the lack of sleep that's making you fail. It's the partying that's making you not sleep, that's making you too tired to take your courses seriously, right? It's a different set of causation. So you have to broaden up the scope a lot of times to make sure that a correlation does have a causation, right? And I'll show you some more examples of this later on too. And then ignoring the margin of error. Um, Mainly politicians do this kind of thing. Advertising companies do these kinds of things. So when survey results are reported, they frequently include a margin of error. You might see this written as a margin of error of plus or minus 5 percentage points, right? And if you've ever seen a poll, you've probably seen something like this before. What does this mean? The simple story is that surveys are normally generated from samples of a larger population, and therefore they're never exact, right? It's a sample size. If you want to interview 100 people in Watertown, but you only interviewed people downtown on the square, you're leaving out a vast portion of the population of Watertown, right? There's 30,000 people in Watertown. What about going to the far north side, the far south side, the far east side, west side, any of that stuff? Are you only sticking to the poverty ridden part of Watertown? Or are you going to go over by the fancy golf course where the big houses part of town, right? That can really change your results. So if you're being honest, or if they're being honest when they provide survey results, they'll tell you there's a margin of error because there are a lot of other factors that we couldn't necessarily count for, right? We only did it in this area, therefore there's got to be a margin of error of at least some kind of percentage, right? So we say, if I say that the number of UNC students who find it difficult to use stats in their writing is 60% plus or minus 4%, that means assuming the normal confidence interval of 95%, that with 95% certainty, we can say that the actual number is between 56 and 64%, right? If it's a 4% margin of error, it's going to go 4% below 60, 4% above 60, right? Now, you don't have to do this math. You don't have to figure out what the margin of error is. I will never make you go and figure out what the confidence interval is or anything like that, or what the p-value is, which you might have heard in a stats class, right? But you have to understand how to interpret these results, all right? So look at this example, right? Excuse me. So if after introducing this handout to the students of UNC, a new poll finds that only 56% plus or minus 3% are having difficulty with stats, right? So I could go to the writing center director and ask for a raise, since I have made a significant contribution to the writing skills of the students on campus. However, she would now no doubt point out that A, this may be a spurious relationship. That's where it's not causation. It's just happenstance correlation, right? Or B, the actual change is not significant because it falls within the margin of error for the original results, right? So between 56 and 64%, that's a pretty big difference. That's a big jump, right? In terms of a grade, that's almost a letter grade. Did you write a D paper or did you write an F paper? That 8% makes a big difference, right? So if you think about it in terms of like that, then it kind of helps you understand better what the margin of error would actually implicate about that information. All right. I want to pause real quick. Is anybody totally lost yet? All right, we'll keep going here. And again, the more examples I show you, the easier it is to understand too. So these ones, which we all learned at one point, if you forgot, it's okay, right? So it says the mistake of the average white writer, averages in quotes, because average in statistics doesn't mean the same thing that it means in like regular non-math language, right? Because average really has three different meanings in math, right? You have the mean average, right? The arithmetic mean, right? This is the average definition. This is what we usually mean when we say average, right? So if we look at this data set here, we have 5, 5, 5, 8, 12, 14, 21, 33, and 38. If I said, give me the average of those numbers, what I mean is give me the mean of those numbers. And what that means is add up all these numbers and then divide it by the total number of numbers. So I would add all these up and then divide it by 9. And that would give me the mean, the average of these numbers, this data set, right? And that's what we usually mean when we say average. But average could also be the median, right? And a median is either the number midway through an odd set of numbers or a value halfway between the two middle numbers in an even set, right? So for our example above here, 5, 5, 5, 8, 12, 14, 21, 33, 38. There's 9 numbers. So to find the median, you just find the number that's in the middle, right? So if there's 9, the one in the middle will be the 5th one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So 12 is the median number, right? It's the one in the middle of this set, right? Is 12 the same as 15.6? They're two very different numbers, right? So the mean of this is 15.6, but the median is 12. It's the number in the middle of the data set. That's a very different kind of average, right? That's almost 4 numbers different. And then we also have the mode average, right? So the mode is the number that occurs most frequently in a series of numbers. So you just, for our set, this one above here, the mode would be 5. So the mode average for this same data set is 5, only because it's the number that occurs the most times, right? We have 3 5s and only one of every other number. So the mode average of this data set is 5. So based on the mean of 15.6, the median of 12, and the mode of 5, we have 3 drastically different averages, right? And you could choose to use these things to support a faulty argument, right? Let's say this was information collected from some kind of survey. And it said, well, in the survey, only 15.6% of people were for the sale of recreational marijuana. And someone else said, well, no, it was worse than that. Out of all these people, only 5 are in support of the sale of recreational marijuana. That's a pretty big difference, right? And they're all using the same word average, but they're relying on you not knowing the difference between mean, median, and mode. All right. So understanding how they calculated the average. It's easy because lots of people do it. Say, oh, the average, blah, 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 believes blah, blah, blah. And on face value, you're like, oh, they give me a number, a percentage. They must have done some research, done some kind of scientific study, gathered the data, figured out what the average is, and now they just told me what it is. That's great. But it's not if they're being untruthful about it or kind of tweaking the numbers like that, right? So just be aware that a lot of people do this. A lot of companies do this. Excuse me. You can also worry about matching your facts with your questions, all right? So if we look at this one, your professor hands back the midterm. The grades are distributed as follows, all right? So 4 people got 100 on the midterm. 5 people got a 98. 2 people got a 95. 4 people got a 63, and 6 people got a 58, right? So then the professor felt that the test must have been too easy because the average median grade was 95, right? If these are all the grades in the class, this is the one in the middle. It's the median grade. 2 people got higher, or 2 numbers higher, 2 numbers lower. This is the median grade, 95, right? But when a colleague asked her about how the midterm grades came out, she answered, knowing that her classes were gaining a reputation for being too easy, that the average or the mean grade was 80. So if you add up all these divided by 6, the average, the mean, is now 80. 80 is a much lower grade than a 95, right? But technically, those are both the averages for the midterm exam, right? And then when your parents ask you how you can justify doing so poorly on the midterm, you're in this group here, you say, well, don't worry about my 63. Oh, sorry, you're in this group right here. Don't worry about my 63. It's not as bad as it sounds. The average mode grade was a 58. Because if you look at how many people got the lowest score, it's 6 people got 58 on the midterm. This is the number that shows up the most. So it's the mode average. So you're saying, well, no, most of the class did way worse than I did. My 63 wasn't too bad. And if you don't tell your parents about these people, they could believe you. And you're not technically lying, right? You just didn't explain that you're talking about the mode average of your final exam or midterm exam, right? And if it's easy to not technically lie and be sneaky with something like this, imagine what you can do when the numbers and the information is so much more difficult to sift through, right? And people know that. So they take advantage of people's either ignorance or laziness about not understanding these types of things, right? Excuse me. You can also alter evidence based on graph data, right? So if we look at these 3 here, all right, we have chart A, chart B, and then chart C. They all look pretty different, right? They're all red, right? They all have an X and a Y axes. They all have some kind of point in the middle of them, right? But they all look really, really different, right? So if we look at this one, so for example, where is that? If we look here, right? What is the bottom here? We start at 1985 on the Y, on the X axis, and we start at 0 on the Y axis, right? Over here, same year point, 1985, but down here, we're starting at 20. So beginning the axis at a different number gives you a different looking graph, right? Here is the 20 right there, and here's their 20 way down here. It's the exact same data point. These are both 20 and 1985, 20 and 1985. But the way that they drew the chart makes a difference. It looks like 2 different pieces of information, right? Because of that, this one looks like there's a really sharp increase and then a pretty sharp decline as well. This one, the increase is a little more subtle and the decline is much more subtle, right? So if we're saying, well, it's not so bad that we peaked here because we're slowly going down, versus this one, it's like, oh, we rocketed up to the top and now we're shooting down to the bottom. It looks like two pieces of information that's totally different. Okay? And then this one, if you draw a graph up to 100 versus these ones only up to 30, and this one peaked at 28, the top of this part, well, of course it's going to look like this. This one looks really minimal, right? Like, oh, no, there's all this room for improvement up here. This isn't bad at all. Yay. All the exact same data drawn on a different scale, right? So don't be confused or don't be tricked when you see graphs. Look at the graph. See if it's saying something that it's not really saying, right? Because they can trick you like that a lot of times. Percentages is a big one. I'm going to do some more stuff on this in a minute, but percentages are only as good as what you're taking a percentage of, right? So if we say, let's look at crime rates to see how this works. Suppose we have two cities, Springfield and Shelbyville. In Springfield, the murder rate has gone up 75%, while in Shelbyville, the rate has only increased by 10%. So on the surface, you would say, I am never going to Springfield. The murder rate went up 75%. Shelbyville, the murder rate only went up by 10%. And 10 is a smaller number than 75, so Shelbyville must be the safer place to live, right? So it says, well, hold on a second, because this is actually much less clear than it looks. In order to really know which city has a worse problem, you have to look at the actual numbers. If I told you that Springfield had 4 murders last year and 7 this year, that's a 75% increase. And Shelbyville had 30 murders last year and 33 murders this year. Does that change your answer? Of course it does, because you'd much rather live in Springfield when they only had 7 murders last year compared to Shelbyville, where they had 33 murders last year, right? But if you only saw the percentages, you would be tricked into thinking Shelbyville is much, much safer when it's not, right? They use percentages like this instead of providing the actual numbers for what it's a percentage of. Almost anytime someone is trying to get a law passed, you'll see percentages like this used in gun control debates all the time. You'll see it right now on COVID stuff about percentages of masks and not wearing masks, mask mandates, not using mask mandates, being 6 feet apart, not being 6 feet apart. People abuse percentages all the time because this sounds really convincing, right? Murder rate in Springfield up 75%. Murder rate in Shelbyville, 10%. Yeah. But then you look at the numbers that those percentages are based on, makes a huge difference. All right. And then it says, well, not so fast, because we still don't have all the facts. We have to make the comparison between the two based on equivalent standards. To do that, we have to look at the per capita rate, right? Often given in rates of per 100,000 people per year. So per capita usually means one person per 100,000. All right. So if Springfield only has 700 residents, but Shelbyville has 3.3 million residents, then Springfield has a murder rate of 1,000 murders per 100,000 people. By comparison, Shelbyville only has 1 murder per 100,000 people. So now you're like, well, wait a minute. Shelbyville is the safer place to live, right? And it's all depending on how much of the data is given to you, right? So we've gone from thinking that Springfield is a terrible place to thinking that, oh no, Shelbyville is the terrible place. To then when you have the full data, you're like, oh, no. Shelbyville is terrible or is great, right? They had a lot of murders because there's 3.3 million people that live there, right? Springfield only had 700 people, but a lot of them are getting murdered percentage-wise, like per capita. So having full access to the data that created the percentage is really important. Okay. Excuse me. The rest of it I'm covering a different one. And so that's in this one here. So you can review that as much as you need just to get a good understanding of how to use some basic stats to make sure you're not being lied to, right? Well, it's not technically lying. They're just misusing stats, all right? So if we look at these things, so comparing 2 or more groups, much of stats, especially in medicine and psychology, is used to compare two or more groups and attempts to figure out if the two groups are different from one another, right? This is very, very common. We're to compare these two groups, right? Educators do it. We'll give one class this kind of test and another class that's the same course a different test. And we'll see which class does better on which test, right? We're gathering information to see if I write a test this way versus this way, which one is more productive for the students? Which kind of test will give me better understanding of if they're learning this or not, right? And then I'll use that kind of test more often, right? So people do that all the time. But in this example, let's say that a drug company has developed a pill, which they think increases the recovery time from the common cold. Wouldn't that be nice? How would they actually find out if the pill works or if it doesn't? What they might do is get two groups of people from the same population, say people from a small town in Indiana who had just caught a cold. So two different groups of people in small town Indiana who just had a cold, and then administer the pill to one group and give the other group a placebo or a drug that they think is the real drug, but it's really not. It's usually like a sugar pill, right? But they don't know it's not the real drug. They could then measure how many days each group took to recover, right? Typically, one would calculate the mean of each group, so the pure average, right? Lost my place. Let's say that the mean recovery time for the group with the new drug was 5.4 days, and the mean recovery time for the group with the placebo or the fake drug was 5.8 days, right? So on the surface, it looks like, well, the drug works. They recovered 0.4 days faster than the people that didn't actually take the drug. So it seems like it's positive. Yay, the drug works. Not great, but it works, right? But the question becomes, is this difference due to random chance, or does taking the pill actually help you recover from the cold faster? The means of the two groups alone does not help us determine the answer to this question. Like always, we need more data. We need more information, right? Sample size is important. If our example study only consisted of two people, one from the drug group and one from the placebo group, there would be so few participants that we would not have much confidence that there's a difference between the two groups, right? That is to say, there's a high probability that chance explains our results. Any number of explanations might account for this. For example, one person might be younger and thus have a better immune system, right? So if you only gave the drug to one person and the fake drug to another person, but the person that got the drug was a healthy, athletic 18-year-old, and the person that got the fake one was a bedridden, crippled 92-year-old, right? Clearly, the young, healthy person is going to recover faster, regardless of if the drug works or not, right? So sample size in that kind of example, it's too small of a sample size, right? Excuse me. If the sample is drawn at random from the population, then these random variations in participants could be approximately equal in the two groups. So if instead of targeting a young, healthy person versus a old, feeble person, right, you pick 1,000 random people to give the drug to and 1,000 random people to give the fake drug to, right? If it's randomized enough, you should get the same kind of makeup of people in both groups. You'll get younger, healthy people. You'll get younger, not so healthy people. You'll get middle-aged people, older people across both groups, right? So now the sample size is better. It's a large enough sample size and it's varied enough. And both of them have enough of the variation within those two groups, right? And they even say it here, be wary of stats with small sample sizes unless they're peer reviewed, because it's important, right? And then variability, right? Excuse me. So let's say we have a large enough sample size. We'll still need some more information. We need variability, all right? We need to know that the typical person takes 5 to 6 days to recover from a cold. But does everyone recover around 5 or 6 days? Or do some people recover in 1 day and others it takes 10 days to recover, right? If we're looking at the mean, the pure average, and the average was 5.6 days, maybe some people recover in 1 day, maybe some people it takes 10 days, right? So then understanding the spread of the data will tell us how effective the pill is. If everyone in the placebo group takes exactly 5.8 days to recover, then it's clear that the pill has a positive effect. But if people have a wide variability in their length of recovery, then the picture becomes fuzzier. So only when the mean, the sample size, and the variability have been calculated can a proper conclusion be made, all right? So you'd have to know all three pieces of data to actually say, yes, this pill actually works, or no, this pill does not work, right? If you leave out any bit of this information, then you're really tricking people. And if you want to sell this drug, you might trick people, right? You might have a small sample size. You might not have variability, right? Or you might choose to use the mode instead of the mean or something like that, right? So again, if you don't know all these three things, it's not always trustworthy unless it's from a peer-reviewed scholarly article, right? Here they get into p-values. You don't have to worry about that one there. So now going back to that correlation versus causation, all right? So correlation tests for a relationship between two variables. Remember, coffee mug, dropping it, coffee spilling all over my desk. However, seeing two variables moving together doesn't necessarily mean we know whether one variable causes the other, right? That would be causation, right? So a famous saying, correlation does not imply causation, right? Because strong correlation might indicate causality or the causation, but there could be other explanations. It might be the result of random chance where the variables appear to be related, but there's no true underlying relationship. They just really seem to come together in pairs. There may be a third lurking variable. Remember, it's not that you're tired, you're failing. It's the partying that makes you tired, that makes you fail, right? So it changes the relationship, right? Excuse me. And this is tough because we do this all the time. Most of the things we believe in, it's from observational data. It's from things we have witnessed, right? Or things we have read, right? So think about something like this. Let's think about this with an example. Imagine that you're looking at health data. You observe a statistically significant positive correlation between exercise and cases of skin cancer. That is, the people who exercise more tend to be the people who get skin cancer. And on the surface, that sounds wrong. You're like, well, if you're exercising, you're probably healthier. Shouldn't that give you less skin cancer, right? So the correlation seems very strong. Every time a doctor has this patient and they get skin cancer, they find out they exercise every single day, right? So without exploring it further, you might just think that exercise is related to cancer, that exercise causes cancer, right? Or the inverse, that having cancer makes people want to exercise, right? I mean, you could argue it both ways, I guess, right? So you would think that. But think about all the other pieces of information you don't have. And some of you might already know the answer, right? If you exercise a lot, very, very often, and granted, not if you live up here, but you're probably a runner, right? You probably run 4, 5, 6 days a week before you go to work or when you get home from the work on the weekends. Maybe you run marathons. And if you're doing all this running, you're outside, you're in the sun all the time. So it isn't exercise causing skin cancer. It's you being exposed to the sun for so many more hours every single day than someone who doesn't exercise, who's inside the shaded protection of their house, playing video games and eating potato chips, right? So it's a chirality, right? It's not a causation. They just correlate together, right? But that isn't what's causing the skin cancer. Right? So think about those types of things. Just because something seems to happen and seems to make something else happen doesn't mean it's a causation. It doesn't mean one causes the other thing. There could just be a correlation. And in this case, the correlation is, oh, outside all the time. That's the important part of the cause of the skin cancer. Right? And there's some more on those that are a little bit deeper. These ones I just like because it's a funny way to look at correlation. And so all these things show correlation. They're things that tend to happen at about the same rate. So the United States spending on science, space, and technology correlates with suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation, right? So we look at the red line, the US spending on space and science technology, it goes like this. And the exact same kind of stuff, look at this line. Oh, look at this line of suicide by strangulation and hanging. Oh, there's an insane correlation. They're so close, right? Do these two have anything to do with each other? Not a thing, right? But they do correlate with one another. They do not cause one another. Massive difference, right? Look at the number of people who drown by falling into a pool. It correlates with films Nicolas Cage appeared in. So anytime Nick Cage has a movie coming out, you better stay away from your swimming pool, right? Because the correlation shows when there's a Nick Cage movie, more people drown in their swimming pools. So don't go to your swimming pool any summer when there's a Nick Cage film that comes out, right? That's ludicrous. No one would actually live their lives that way. There is no causation between these two. There is a correlation. They just tend to happen at the same rate, right? That's the only thing tying them together. Isn't it funny too? Where's it at? No. People who drowned after falling out of a fishing boat correlates with the marriage rate in Kentucky, right? So, as fewer and fewer people drown after falling out of a fishing boat, fewer people get married in Kentucky. Does that mean that they were going to marry someone that was in the fishing boat and now they can't because they're dead? No, of course not. There is no causation between the two. They just correlate. They seem to happen at about the same rate, right? But you could use data like this to convince someone that when a lot of people fall out of a fishing boat and drown, a lot of people are getting married in Kentucky, right? Because look, the data proves it. It's right there, but it doesn't. It's correlation, not causation. So make sure you understand the difference, especially when you read something that says X correlates with Y or A correlates with B, like this data point correlates with this data point. Because if it's only a correlation, that means there's no proof those things are actually tied together, right? It sounds like they are, but they're really not. So be really weary of those kinds of things. Okay. And so all these you can look through more and more and more. Excuse me. But that's basically some how to understand. Again, you don't have to do the stats, you don't have to do the math, but understanding that if the stats they're providing you are good, credible statistical analyses of those pieces of information. Again, whatever issue it is that you're looking at. All right. So for another example, not that one, this one. All right. So this one, and this is from a British thing, but it still makes sense. All right. So this one is very timely and important. So where you go? We're going to talk about COVID. All right. Let's start with the line about how we are overreacting to a disease with only a 1% mortality rate. All right. It's actually wrong. The World Health Organization says that the mortality rate is 2.1%. And again, mortality rate, this means 1% of all people who get COVID will die from it. That's what this says. The actual number is right around 2.1. It does change from month to month, but the WHO, the World Health Organization, says 2.1% of all people who contract COVID die from it, right? So basically 2 out of every 100 people, right? That's how percentages work, right? But let's say for the sake of argument, let's keep it at 1%, right? Someone's arguing it's only a 1% mortality rate. That's why we shouldn't worry about COVID. It's so low, right? But a mortality rate of 1% doesn't sound like much at all, right? 1 out of 100 dying. I mean, it's still one tragic death, but it doesn't sound terrible, right? It doesn't sound like enough to shut down the global economies, to kick everyone out of their dorms and send everyone home from college and stuff like that, right? It doesn't sound that bad, because the mortality rate for the flu is like 5%, 6%, something like that. So the flu is technically more deadly than COVID, right? A higher percentage of people that get the flu die from it than the percentage of people who get COVID and die from it, right? But that's just one piece of information. We don't have the full picture yet, right? So think about things like this. Well, 1% mortality rate, that's far less than Ebola, which has a 50% mortality rate, right? If you get Ebola, you have 50-50 odds of dying from it. That's a high mortality rate, right? Or MERS, which was another coronavirus, that's a 35% mortality rate. That means if you get MERS, you're 1/3 likely to die from it, right? 1 out of every 3 people that get MERS dies from it. 1 out of every 2 people that get Ebola die from it, right? These mortality rates are way higher for these two than they are for COVID, right? And that's a really strong argument, right? And you've probably heard a lot of these before. But that's not the point with a proportion. It's not the percentage itself that's important. It's what it's a percentage of. Think back to that Springfield, Shelbyville murder rate kind of thing. If you have 100 people infected, that means only 1 person dying. That's 1% mortality rate, 1 out of 100. That's not a big deal at all. But if there's 100,000 people that are infected, that means 1,000 people are dying, right? That's not insignificant. That's a big jump, right? Because a mortality rate of 1% means just that, 1% of a given population. So if the population of people that get it is 100,000 people that get COVID, that means 1,000 of them are dead, right? That's a big number. That's a big deal, right? So for an example, on the 8th of January, 1,035 people died in the UK within 28 days of testing positive. To put that in context, 67 Britons died during the September 11th terrorist attacks, right? And this one is clearly biased because it says the right-wing media. If you see that, probably a biased source, right? But I've checked the numbers. The numbers are legit. The right-wing media admonished terrorism and honor those who died in the terrorist atrocities. However, on the 8th of January, COVID-19 killed 1,545% of the number of Britons murdered on September 11th. In other words, a huge number more than the number of British people that died on 9/11, right? And comparing a 9/11 terrorist attack to a viral outbreak, that's not really very fair, right? But this is very clever writing, right? It's a good use of using these kind of logical kind of tricks to make you feel bad for people. It's effective, right? But the important part, the focus on the 1% mortality ignores other basic facts, all right? So while only 1% of patients with COVID will die, about 15% will need hospital care, right? And about 5% of those infected will need to come to an ICU or a critical care hospital, right? So if 100 people are infected, that's 15 coming to the hospital, 5 needing critical care. If 100,000 people get COVID, that's 15,000 people needing a hospital bed and 5,000 people needing to go to the ICU, right? And so these other things have other impacts, right? So even if the mortality rate seems low, it's not compared to the number in the population, right? So let's say the mortality rate is 1%. And let's say that roughly 60% of the world will get COVID, right? That's billions of people, right? And 1% of billions is a lot of people, right? And that's why the percentages don't do a good job of telling you everything. It's just a percentage. You have to understand everything else that's behind that to make real sense of the numbers where that percentage comes from. Again, just like that Shelbyville, Springfield murder rate kind of thing, right? On the surface, percentages sound really, really damning, or like, oh, that's a silly little thing. We shouldn't be worried about that. But you have to dig a little bit deeper into the information to see where those percentages are coming from, right? And there's some other things like, so if the hospitals are filled to capacity, what about other people, right? So if you're sick right now, you go to the hospital, you're on a waiting list unless you have COVID, right? Because they get first priority, right? That doesn't mean that you're a healthy enough person to make it, right? It could just mean, oh, the ICU is out of beds. Sorry, we can drive you to Syracuse, maybe, and hopefully they'll have a bed for you. So there's other implications in terms of like the COVID argument, right? And you can talk forever. You can look up stats forever about who believes this about COVID and who believes this about COVID. And it's fine if you look at that, but then see where they're getting that data from. How are they building these percentages, right? If it's an average, what kind of average are they using? Are you using the mean, the mode, the median, right? It matters. It really has an impact, right? I mean, you could spend hours looking up this stuff on your own too. That's just a good relevant example. Right. Moving right along. All right. So these two I'm not going to cover a lot, but I'm going to show you some tips on just avoiding plagiarism because we've talked about it before. Plagiarism is just using someone else's ideas and pretending like they're your own, right? And how you pretend like they're your own is you do not cite them. You don't give the source credit. You don't tell me the author's name. You don't tell me the title of the article, any of that information, right? So as long as you provide that information, you're not plagiarizing, right? But some things that are a little tricky, right? So look at these ones. If you have words or ideas that are presented in a magazine, a book, a newspaper, a song, a TV program, a movie, a web page, computer program, a letter, an advertisement, anything that didn't come from your own brain, right? For the most part, you would have to cite that, right? If you have information that you gain through interviewing or conversing with another person face-to-face, over the phone, through email, through Zoom, in writing, a letter, whatever, if you use information they gave you, you would have to cite that information, right? Have to say who said this, if it was an interview and all that kind of stuff, right? Obviously, any exact words that you copy. So anytime you copy paste something, there better be a citation there, right? If there's a chart, a diagram, a picture, an illustration, anything visual, and you use that visual in your paper, you also have to cite that. For this kind of paper, you can totally use graphs if it really helps clarify what you're talking about. I will say that the vast majority of students misuse graphs. It'll be in there for one reason, and you'll put this giant graph that takes up half a page, and you could have just simply told me what that one part of the graph you wanted me to talk about was, right? So in general, avoid using them unless there's so much information on the graph that you're referring to in your paper, right? And then if you include a graph, Obviously, it doesn't count towards your page minimums, right? So if you put in like 4 giant graphs and then you only write like a 4-page paper, yeah, you didn't really write the pages you're supposed to write, right? So anything you see from something else, you'd have to cite, right? But there are some things you don't. Your own ideas and opinions, right? Even if it's something that you said or wrote in another class, you don't have to cite yourself, right? Common knowledge is where it gets really tricky, right? Because a lot of times you're like, well, I just know this. I don't know where I learned this from. I just know this, right? And so these are some really basic ones, right? There are 365 days in a year. The earth orbits the sun, right? H2O is the molecular structure of water, right? You don't have to cite your chemistry textbook if you're talking about this, right? That's just basic common knowledge, right? Any really well-known quote, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Or ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, right? You would still use quotation marks because it's someone else's words, but you wouldn't have to go find exactly where these things came from. They're very common phrases, right? Or something that's subject specific, right? So if you're writing about an issue and the vast majority of people that are in that field know this thing, right? It is so commonplace for everyone to know this thing, you wouldn't necessarily have to cite that as well. And while there's no specific number for that, if it's something that you think at least half of your population knows that, it's common knowledge, right? It's probably common knowledge that the most popular app today for people in college is TikTok, right? Could you look it up and find out the specific percentage of people that use TikTok versus other apps? Yeah, you could. But because you are all a bunch of college students and you know how often you use TikTok, you can clearly just state that, right? That's a good example of like a common knowledge thing you wouldn't have to cite, right? So we look at like these ones here. Only some of them need to be cited, right? If we say 86% of internet users have taken steps online to remove or mask their digital footprints, you didn't just know this, you saw this somewhere else. You would have to cite where this 86% came from, right? Someone did the research, someone did the work, someone did the data collection to give you this number. Give them the credit they deserve, right? The Supreme Court ruling for Brown versus the Board of Education states racial discrimination in public education is unconstitutional, right? So like something like this one too. Most of us kind of remember learning about Brown versus Board of Education, right? But do you remember the specific wording of the Supreme Court ruling? I don't think so, unless you're a lawyer specializing in something like this. So you would have to cite this, right? Paris is the capital of France. Pretty sure more than half the world knows that. That's common knowledge. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States. That's common knowledge, right? Water freezes at 30 degrees Fahrenheit. That's common knowledge, right? 52,950 unaccompanied homeless youth were supported through school-based programs in 2008, 2009. That is not common knowledge. You had to look this up somewhere. You better cite this one, right? And that's pretty much it. As long as you cite it, you're avoiding plagiarism. Even if you cite it incorrectly, you're still not plagiarizing, right? As long as there is an effort there, you avoid plagiarism. Now, in terms of earning points on an essay, you want to cite them properly though, right? So when you're citing your sources, remember in this course, we're always using MLA or Modern Language Association, in-text citations, and works cited page that goes at the end of your essay, all right? So most of your citations will look like this, right? You'll have your quote that you pulled from some source. At the end of the quote or at the end of the sentence, you'll have a parentheses, the author's last name, a space, the page number that quote appeared on, close the parentheses, and put the period at the end, all right? Just like that, all right? If you have a paraphrase and you didn't include the information in the signal phrase, same thing. Author's last name, a space, page number, close the parentheses, period at the end, right? The most common mistake is leaving the period at the end of your sentence here, right? And a period indicates the end of a sentence. This is still part of the sentence, right? It's not part of a sentence you learned in 4th grade, but it's still part of the sentence. So your end punctuation will go at the end. The only time you leave punctuation here in a quote is if it's a question mark, right? Because your sentence isn't a question, the quote was a question. So you'd actually put the question mark inside of the quotation marks here, but then still put a period at the end here, right? Not a big deal, but it can be pretty confusing, right? So like something like this one. It is reported that blah, 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 whether it's a quote or a paraphrase, doesn't matter. And then parentheses, author's last name, space, page 123, close parentheses, period. Just like that. All right. So we look at these kinds of things. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So these are incorrect ones, right? Look at this one. Quote, Margaret had never spoken of Hellstone since she left it. Period. End quote. Citation, right? The period's in the wrong place, though. This period should be over here at the end. In this example, Margaret had never spoken of Hellstone since she left it. All right, no period here, but they put a comma between the author's last name and the page number. MLA does not use commas to separate the author's name and the page number. This is only an APA formatting thing. So if you're writing a paper for like psychology or human services, they use APA formatting. So you will use commas there. You'll also use year of publication instead of page numbers, though. So there's a number of differences between MLA and APA. But this class, we only teach and focus on MLA. Right? In this example, they use the author's entire last name. We don't need that. We just need the author's last name. Because when you look at a works cited page, they're going to be alphabetized based on the first thing that appears, and that would be the author's last name, right? So take out Elizabeth, then it would be correct. This one, so let's assume that we didn't have the author's name, right? We only had the title of whatever it was, right? This one, it's got the title of the book, and if we have the author's name, it would be there. If it's the title of the book, you would put this, but if it's a book, you're going to know the author anyway, right? So this example, it's not really a great one, but if you don't have the author's name, the first thing you're going to have is going to be the title of the thing, right? So not for a book, because all books have authors, but if it's like a website article, a lot of times it won't tell you who the author is, or the author will be like the Associated Press or New York Times staff, and that doesn't tell you a name, right? So instead of putting something that isn't really a name, you would just put the title of the article. And remember, articles are short works, so they're always placed inside of quotation marks, right? Excuse me. I think, no, well, yeah, this chart's actually pretty handy. Sorry. So this one, you start here, all right? Is this your own original idea or information? If it is, you don't need a citation. If it's not, you go down here. Does your source have an author? Oh yeah, it's totally got an author. Did you mention the author's name in the text already? That signal phrase, that lead-in phrase. If you did, yeah, I did. Okay, there's no need to mention the author again, but does your source have page numbers? Oh yeah, it does have page numbers. Okay. Did you mention the author of the title already within your text? Yep. Then add the page numbers in parentheses at the end of the sentence. So like this example here. According to Dr. Wilson, wildlife should remain in the wild. Page 37, right? I didn't have to put Wilson in my parentheses here because I put it in my signal phrase here. But if I didn't put it in my signal phrase here, it would have to be in here in the parentheses before 37, right? So you can follow this flow chart, right? So is it my own information? No. Does it have an author? No, it doesn't. Well, then include the title of the source or the first word of the title in parentheses at the end of the sentence, right? So for example, parentheses inside of quotes, because it's a short work, beyond. So the article is either titled beyond or it's titled beyond something, 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 right? But the first thing that's going to show up is the word beyond, right? So you can abbreviate it, especially if it's a really long title. Don't copy and paste this like 2-line long title inside of your in-text citation every single time. Just use the first word or the first couple of words. So let's say you have 2 articles and they both begin with the word beyond. You'd have to include enough of the second or third words to make sure it's clear which one you're talking about at all times, right? So let's say one article was called Beyond the Universe, and the other one's called Beyond Common Core, right? So you could write Beyond the Universe or Beyond Common, right? And that would indicate the 2 different use of the sources, right? It's like, does it have page numbers? Well, no, it doesn't have page numbers, right? And this is only for like video media. So if it's a media source, they mean video source. You can indicate the time when it happened, right? So for example, if you're watching an episode of CSI, right? So between the 1 minute mark and the 15 to 50 second mark. So between 1 minute and 15 seconds and 1 minute and 50 seconds, in this article called CSI, did this thing take place, right? But if there's something else that doesn't have a timestamp on it, you simply just omit what wouldn't be there, right? You don't say like no page number or anything like that. If you have a citation, there's no page number. It's just assumed there were no page numbers, right? So you can actually use this little chart every single time to make sure if you needed to cite something or not. Right. Now, how do you get those things here? All right. Excuse me. Oh, I'll show you this one first. So these ones, you want to look at this, right? This is the end of text. This is after your essay. That's what they mean by end of the text, like all of them, right? So this is your works cited page, right? So your works cited page is a separate page at the very end of your essay, right? So even if you finish, let's say you finish an essay and you've got 6.5 pages, you don't put the works cited page right underneath the essay. You do what's called a page break and you put it on the next clean page, right? Still all the same document, right? If you don't know how to do a page break, you can just keep hitting the enter button enough, but I'll show you how to do it in a second. So you alphabetize it as well. So your works cited page will be alphabetized by the first major word. So it's usually the author's last name or the first word in the title of an article if there is not an author, all right? You also do something called a hanging indent. A hanging indent is basically a backwards paragraph. So with a paragraph, you indent the first line, but none of the other ones. In a hanging indent, the first line stays flush with the margin and every other line is indented. I'll show you how to do that too. So we're looking at this one. So here's a video of what I'm going to show you. So if you need to review what I'm doing right now, you could just click on this video, right? It's much shorter probably than what I'm going to tell you to do. But this is a link for something called MyBib, right? So if you click on this, or if you simply type in MyBib, it'll show up right there. So when you start it, and I would highly recommend taking the extra 10 seconds to log in to make an account. As you see here, I use my SUNY Jefferson account. You can use your Canon Mail account as well. Super easy. And I can almost guarantee you, you're going to use this for every other class you have to write a paper in. So do it now, right? Because once I show you the magic, you're like, oh, this is amazing. They should show this in high school. All right. So whenever I need to cite something, like let's say I'm going to use this article here. All right. And I wanted to cite it. All I do is I copy the URL. Where'd I go? And I add a citation, either one. Since it's a brand new project, I can add it right here. And then it tells you what to do. First, select the type of source you want to cite, then search for it in the box. By default, it's on website. It's always on website by default. So I can just paste in the URL and click search. What it's doing now is it's trying to find that page and anyone else who has ever used MyBib to cite the same source, right? The more credible the source is, the easier it's going to pull the information, right? So when it pulls this one, lies, damn lies, and statistics, lies, damn lies, statistics. Yep, that's the same one. So I'm like, yep, that's it. So I just click on it. And it takes you to a different page. It says, we couldn't detect the web page author for this website. Please check the source. Does it have a web page author? Oh, let me look at it. Nope, it just says public health, medical education. So you look at the top, and then sometimes you go to the very bottom of an article, and maybe it's written at the bottom. Nope, not written at the bottom here either, right? So there's no author given for this source. That's one sign of maybe not the most credible source, right? But I can say, nope, it didn't. We can detect the date published for this website. So again, look at the top or at the bottom. On this one, it's at the top. February 9th, 2021. So you just go back to MyBib and go, yep, 2021, February, is it 9th? Yeah, February 9th. And then click next. So I put in 2021, February the 9th. And it takes you to this page, right? So you can still edit things here, right? So title of the article or page. Did it get the right title? Yep, it sure did. Go back and double check. Yep, it's got the whole thing. Date it was published. Yep, here's the URL. The date that it was viewed by you. If it's blank, just click on today and it fills in today's date for you, right? Website name, McDreamy Musings. Let's see. Yep, McDreamy Musings. It's right there in the URL, right? Was there a publisher for it? I didn't see one up here. So publishers, you want to look at the top and at the bottom, and you're looking for a copyright date. I don't see one here, right? See, it says powered by Squarespace. That's just a website builder. That's not actually a publisher. So this one doesn't seem to have a publisher. So I'm just going to leave that one blank, right? And then I'm going to click save. So it does here, and it tells you what it did for it. It formats it in the right order. So I used to have to spend an entire class day going over what goes first, how do you format it? Is it in italics? Is it in quotes? Is there a period here? Where do I put a comma? Do I have to italicize this? All these types of things. This does all of that work for you. And in my experience, it is right like 99% of the time. It's really efficient. It's good, right? Mainly because MyBib is always free because it was built by educators. Educators spent their own hard-earned time building this for everyone else's usage. So they make sure to do a really good job on it, right? And so it puts the source in there for you right there. And what's cool is it also tells you, okay, so when you're citing this one inside of your essay, it's right here. This is what you would cite. This is a good example of a really long one, especially if you use this article a number of times. You're going to get really sick of copying and pasting this giant long thing into your essay. It looks annoying. It's too long, right? And it's going to bother the reader. So you wouldn't do the whole thing. You might just do lies, damn lies. Or if it's the only article that begins with the word lies, just put lies inside of quotation marks as your in-text citation, right? But it shows you the full use of it here. So let's say we want to look up another article now, and I'm just going to keep building one. I'm going to use the New York Times one. If I could learn how to type, not games. You know what I meant. There you go. Let's say I just use this article. Oh, it's live. That still works. All right. So let's say I wanted to use this article here. I'm going to copy the URL, come back in here. I'm going to add a citation, paste the URL in there, and click search. And so here it even says, oh, credible. It's telling me, oh, the New York Times website is a credible website. That doesn't mean everything in every article is. It means in general, it's a credible website, right? But it's good to know. It's like, okay, yeah, it's that one. Pfizer says it's booster offering stimulant protection, blah, blah, blah. Yep, that's it. So I click on it. Because it's a really credible, well-crafted web page, notice I didn't have to enter any of this information. Because it's a web page that's built right, MyBib knows where to pull this information, right? It's all written inside of the code of the web page. So it filled in the author name. It filled in the title of it. It filled out when it was published, right? It's online. It's got the URL, today's date, the name of the news source. It's got all that information there. So almost any major newspaper website will do this. So it makes it super easy. Like, oh yeah, that's all right. Save it. And you just keep doing this with all the sources you find online, right? When you're done with it, the really, really cool part, you just click download works cited. So I'm going to download my works cited, and I use Word. So I click on Word. It's celebrating that things I'm done with my research paper, right? I'm going to save it, and I'll show you what it looks like. Oops. So I didn't change anything. It just opened in the wrong window. And here it is right here. Here's my works cited page that I didn't have to create, right? Perfect. It's got works cited centered in the middle. It's got them alphabetized because L comes before, or LA comes before LI, right? Author, last name, first name, title of the article, title of the publisher, when it was published, the URL, and the date that I accessed it, right? It generates all this for you. It does the hanging indent. It's got 1-inch margins exactly like it's supposed to be. It's double space. It's also in Times New Roman 12-point font. It's everything you want it to be, right? So then you can take this and just copy and paste this into your essay, right? So I'm going to open up another Word document. And when you do that, you right click it and you want to make sure that you keep all the same stuff, right? So keep the source formatting. The source is what you copied from. You want to keep that, right? And do that. Because you noticed you don't include the hyperlinks for this. I think it's a dumb rule, but it is the rule. So you shouldn't have the hyperlink here. If you can't figure out how to remove the hyperlink, don't lose a bunch of sleep over it. I'm never going to penalize you for that, but a future professor might. So kind of be careful with that. So now I have my works cited page right here. It's perfect. Yay. So let's say I wrote my essay. I'm gonna plagiarize real quickly, just because I need a bunch of text real fast for an example's sake. All right. So let's pretend like I wrote this. We all know I didn't. And my essay was up here. All right. And here's my essay, right? Yeah, here's my essay. Oh no, works cited is down here at the bottom. I need it to be at the top of the next clean page, right? And what most people will do is like, oh, I'll just move the cursor up here. And I go like that. Yay, now it's fixed, right? What you should do, especially because we live in a more digital world now, oops, is scroll down, and here you go in front of it, and up here on the ribbon, you click on insert, and then page break. And what that does is it takes whatever is just to the right of the cursor onto the next clean page. Yay, perfect, just like that, right? Now it's going to be perfect, right? Because now if I add more stuff here, it keeps doing it. It doesn't just move it down the 5 times I hit enter. It's always going to be on its own page, no matter how much information I add in here. Yep, bottom of its own page. Oh, how did I do that? Oh, because I hit enter before. Yeah, I screwed that one up. So again, cursor in front of it, insert tab, page break. Puts it down there every single time. All right. So another thing you can do with this. So this is great. See all these right here? This is how many times I use examples for these ones. I also use this for my own research. So there's lots of other projects I've done in here. It saves them too. So if you need to go back and look at something, it's going to be in there. Yay. And if I show you another example of a bigger works cited page, because this is more of like what yours will look like. Yeah, I got all my sources. Same thing. It does all the work for me, alphabetizes them, does the hanging indent, got the margins. Everything is great. So you definitely want to bookmark this website. All right. What you can also do, so if we're looking at the library, I didn't open that one up today. Doesn't really matter. Just trying to show an example real fast. Let's say I use this one. Sure. So for all these, if you watch the video, oh, come on. You always want to see how you can cite these types of things, right? So on this page, it's down here, cite the book, right? So if you click that, it shows you the citation. Make sure it's on MLA, right? So let's say I also use this one. I can just copy this and it's Hanley. Go back to my works cited page and it should go right in there. I'm going to paste it right in there. Oops. But I want to make sure that I keep the source formatting. I screwed that up. I'll show you real quick. All right, if you right click this, because it's a hyperlink, remove hyperlink. That's how you get rid of it. So you get a link here, right click it, remove, and it just takes it away. So now I can use the sources that they give me, the citations for, and just paste it into the works cited page that I generated using this website, right? If it doesn't give it to you, there's other things as well. Like let's say I'm trying to find an article. Come on. Did I just break my computer? Let's try to search. Misspelling. Terrible. Yeah, it's just freezing up now. There you go. That turn on. There we go. So I'm looking at like this one, because EBSCOhost, you'll see a lot of these as well. So I'm looking at this one here. Oh, it's the actual journal. All right, I got to take a second to do a real search. Sorry. Hello. Hopefully this is a real article. All right, here we go. So this is a really common one for the databases as well. So if I wanted to cite this one, the easiest way is you go over here and there's a little button that says cite and you click on it and then just scroll down until you see the MLA one. Yay, MLA. And then you just copy this one and paste it into your works cited page as well, right? Let's say you're on a database that doesn't give you this, right? And you have to do it yourself. What you can do is copy the title of it, go back to EasyBib, add a citation. It's a journal article. I want to paste that in there and search for it. And if I'm lucky, it'll find it for me. And I won't have to manually build it myself. Yep, that's it right there. So I click on that one. It's got all the authors' names. Do you want to type in these names? No, but look how many there were. A lot of authors here. and you don't want to have to type in all those names, right? It's a lot of work. Sweet, does it for me. It's got the title, when it was published, the page range. It even has the digital identifying number that's on there, the date I looked at it, all the journal information, all that stuff that's hard to find. And now it built it. Yay, there it is right there. So you can use this even if you're finding, even with your sources you find in the databases, simply by copying and pasting the title most of the time. It'll find a bunch of them there. Right. And so again, with these, like look at all of these here. Underneath the works cited entry, it shows you what the in-text citation is. So if I use this source, this is my in-text citation at the end of that sentence. If I use this source, that's my in-text citation at the end of that sentence. If I use this source, that's the citation at the end of my sentence. So if you do this right, there's absolutely no reason why you can't get your citations 100%, right? So it really is great. Again, this one, that was dumb of me, totally left the course. I am off my game today, folks, I'm sorry. So learning modules, module 3, open up this one here, or I put it here to make it easier, right? So my bib citation generator, it's just right there, okay? So definitely use this. This will make your life so much easier, and use it for all your classes, right? So let's say you did a research paper for this class, and then you take a human services class, and you can use a lot of the same sources. You're like, oh, it's a similar topic. I can use a lot of the same sources. This is great. You're like, oh, but it's an MLA format. They wanted an APA format. No problem. You go up here and you click on this and you just change it to APA. Yay. And then save. And it automatically reformats it to APA formatting. Yay. Now it'll be right for an APA style paper. If you have a teacher that uses any one of these other ones, Chicago is really common. These are the 3 most common, MLA, APA, and Chicago, right? So you can use like all these ones. These are all the different types, right? There's way too many types of styles, right? But the main ones, MLA, APA, and Chicago, right? Change it back to MLA so I don't forget. Oh, they have a 9 too. That's the most updated one. It's pretty new. So now it's back in MLA, right? So you can do so many things with this. Make an account. It saves all these. I have all these different projects saved. You can just have one that's called English 101 research paper. And then your next class could be, psychology research paper, whatever it is. But you can do so many different things with this website. All right. I'm going to close all these because it's confusing. That's better. All right. Excuse me. So again, with these, if you have any problems with them, let me know. But definitely check out my bib. If you need to review any of these, review any of the videos that are in there, definitely do that as well. All right. So your big thing is your homework. All right. So due this Friday is your research proposal. All right. So again, follow the directions found in the research essay instructions on pages 3 to 4. As a reminder, I just put in right here, be sure to include all of these 7 parts. And I showed this at the end of last class, right? But something on the research essay instructions, you just scroll down to the 3rd page. And here's the research proposal. You must have in your research proposal, number 1, identification of a topic or topic area. Number 2, your research question. Number 3, your background knowledge on the topic. Number 4, a brief discussion of at least 2 articles you have read on your topic. Number 5, the works cited entries for those 2 articles, which if you followed the MyBib procedure, you should have done in about 10 seconds, right? Your research goals, and then a brief possible outline for your paper. And again, like I said last time, your proposal will look just like this, right? It doesn't have to be super long. It can look just like this, right? So my topic area, social mobility and poverty. My research question, why is it so difficult to improve one's socioeconomic class, right? And then a brief kind of free writing about my background knowledge on the topic. Then I read a couple of articles and I briefly discussed the first one, briefly discussed the second one. Then I included the works cited entries for those 2 articles. Then I talked about my goals, what I hope to find, what I hope to be able to prove in my argument. And then a very brief point-by-point outline, right? Intro, body paragraph, body paragraph, body paragraph, body paragraph, body paragraph, body paragraph, conclusion, right? So literally you're just going to look just like this, number it just like this. So you're making sure you're doing all 7 of the parts, all right? And again, with this, if you have any questions, let me know, all right? This, because it is important to know how to do it. And it's really important that you do it because it'll show me if you're in the right way on your research paper. There's so many students that they turn this in. I'm just like, oh, you're going way off track. You're gonna run into this dead end where you're gonna be stuck at 3 pages. But without you knowing that, you could go down that rabbit hole, right? So I actually use this to really help you make sure you're going in the right direction. Because of that, this is worth 15% of your total grade, something like that. I forget the number, but it's worth a lot of your whole grade. It's worth more than a letter grade because it's that important for the research process, right? So don't not do it because it seems like one extra assignment, right? It's really important both for your grade and for your understanding of your research paper, right? So you're just going to do this one, submit it by Friday morning, right? Again, if you can't make the Friday morning deadline, I would much rather you turn in something late, right? I want to be able to give you some feedback on this, and that's a massive hit to your grade if you don't turn in anything, right? But the sooner that I can give you my feedback, the sooner you'll feel comfortable starting to really knock out the research paper itself, all right? I'm going over all of this because today is our last class day. That was really fast. Monday is technically a school day, but Monday is a Thursday schedule. They're doing one of those weird things where on Monday they're pretending like it's Thursday. So if you have any Thursday classes, go to that class next Monday, right? But for us, this is our last class period, right? So that's a lot of time between now and when your research paper is actually due. That's almost 2 weeks, right? So don't forget about it. I know you have final exams, you have other things you have to really focus on, especially if you're doing well in this class and struggling in like your math or bio class. I understand you got to prioritize, right? Don't forget about this, right? You don't want to have an A all semester long and then submit just a terrible piece of crap research paper because you got too busy, you fell behind, and now you got a D or a C, right? You don't want that to happen, right? So knock this out as soon as you can. As soon as you get my feedback on it, say, okay, I know what I have to do. I know how to start approaching my research paper now that I know this is exactly the area that I'm headed, right? And then don't forget, and I'll send out announcements as we get closer to this as well on Blackboard. Don't forget about the research paper, right? If you don't turn it in, you fail basically. So don't forget about it. If you're struggling with anything, once again, please reach out to me. If you want to meet with me and talk about stuff, fantastic. If you want to meet over Zoom to talk about stuff, fantastic, right? I'm actually not giving any final exams. So I'll basically just be in my office all during finals week. So if you want to meet up on Zoom, let me know, right? My office hours don't really apply because I'm not teaching classes either. So if I'm free, I will help you. Just let me know you need the help, all right? Anything else before I let y'all go? All right. Well, I hope to see some of you in person at some point next semester, maybe. It'd be kind of nice to get a face for most of you guys. Um, yeah, that's about it. Good luck on your other final exams. Do your best. Try not to stress out too much. And it sounds silly, but it's only school. If you do poorly, you can do better next time, right? So just keep doing your best and don't drive yourself crazy, right? I'll see y'all some other time.
Are you